Most people don't know this. And I share this with you because it's important for you to understand how important the volunteers are to the backbone of the fire service, not only in the United States, but also in the world. And I'm going to talk more about the volunteers in just a minute. This program tonight is really about remembrance of 9/11. And one of the things I also wanted to talk about is the memorials. So how many of you have ever been to the 9/11 memorial at Ground Zero? Okay, wow. It's most of it, most everybody. It is absolutely a must-see if you're in New York, and I try to spread the word to everyone to check it out. But I think what most people don't know is why we have memorials to first responders in the military. Most people probably don't know. I'm gonna throw this out to you guys. Why do you guys think we have memorials to the military, to the fire service, and the police departments? Who would like to answer that? Yes. Okay, that's good. That's true. It's not wrong. Anybody else? Sure. Sure. To remember them and try to prevent it from happening again. Those are two great answers, and those are correct. But one of the biggest reasons, and thank you for that, by the way. You didn't know there's audience participation tonight. But one of the biggest reasons why we have memorials is because one of the greatest wrongs you can ever do to someone in the military or a first responder who's killed in the line of duty is to forget about them. That is worse than anything, is to forget about those who fell while doing this job, whether they're being paid, they're a volunteer. Remember, our military is a volunteer service. In Israel and other countries, it's compulsory. You must serve a couple of years or you might get drafted. But in the United States, these are people who volunteer to go and do this. And so that is part of the reason why we have these memorials. And that's the reason why they're so important. And as far as the fire service, you know, not for nothing, but a building is on fire and everyone's running out, and you've got 3 guys with a ladder running in. It takes a certain type of person to want to do that. I don't know if you've ever been to a firefighter's funeral, but they're pretty incredible. And the reason they make them incredible is so people who are there will know, hey, if something happens to me, they're not going to forget me. So if you ever have a chance to go to a firefighter's funeral, you must go. It is quite a sight to see. That's one of the reasons why we have memorials. So we never, ever forget. It's also where that motto has come from with 9/11, is to never forget, going to exactly what you said. Never, ever, ever forget. So on 9/11, we know what happened. And there's a story I want to share with you very quickly. And it's a story about a gentleman who was an equities trader he was in the South Tower. His name is Wells Crowther. Wells Crowther is known as the man with the red bandana. I don't know if you know this story, but when he was a child, his father gave him 2 bandanas. He gave him a white handkerchief and told him, this is for show, and he told him how to fold it and put it in his pocket. Then he gave him a red one and he said, this is for blow. This is to blow your nose. So Wells always carried this red bandana. In Miami, that can mean something totally different. So Wells, from the time he was a child, he always carried around this red bandana. He wore it on his head. He had it everywhere with him. He was known for that. He joined his fire department as a junior firefighter when he was 16. He was in Nyack, New York, which is just north of Manhattan. And he was a junior firefighter. He went away to college, played lacrosse at Boston College. And he always wore his red bandana under his helmet. And when he graduated, he always wanted to work down on Wall Street or in financial services. So he took a job with a equities trading firm whose offices were on the 101st floor in the South Tower. So on 9/11, when the first plane hit the North Tower, he actually called his mother to say, hey, I'm in the South Tower. We're evacuating the tower. We're okay. Everything's fine. And that's the last time she heard from him. As Wells was being evacuated and everyone in the South Tower was being evacuated, he made his way to the 78th floor sky lobby on the South Tower. And as there were about 200 people or so waiting to be evacuated, all of a sudden there was a huge explosion. It was, which plane was that? It was United It was American flight, United Airlines flight 175. So United 175 crashed into the South Tower at about 9:03. There were 200 people in the 78th floor sky lobby. Most of them were killed instantly, but many of them were still alive. They were burned very badly. The planes were selected on 9/11 because they were long haul flights. They were either coming from Boston, going out west, or they were coming from San Francisco, coming east. So they had a lot of fuel. What most people don't know is a plane doesn't always fly with their tanks full because of the weight. So they particularly selected these flights because they knew they would have 20,000 gallons of fuel on these planes, which is why they took them. And when they crashed into the South Tower, it just caused a huge explosion, but it also damaged the elevators that were in the 78th floor sky lobby. So now everyone above 78th floor in the South Tower was trapped. And what survivors described was, out of the smoke and all of the fire and the death and destruction, this young man just appeared out of nowhere and told everyone, listen, if you're able, get up and follow me. I found a stairwell out. So what this person did was he was able to lead everyone to the from the 78th floor sky lobby down stairway A, which was the only functioning stairway that was still working in the South Tower. And he led about a dozen people or so, actually about 4 or 5 people, down the stairs to the 41st floor, where the firefighters met them and were able to get them down another bank of elevators. And when I first heard this story, I thought it was amazing because from what I've been told, for firefighters who were fighting fires that day, that it took them about a minute or so to go up each floor in the towers because there were so many people trying to get out and they had so much equipment. So when I think of the firefighters met them on the 41st floor, that means they were walking with 50, 60, 70 pounds of gear for 40 straight minutes. Which, listen, I walk up 5 flights of stairs with my stuff and I'm like ready to resign. 40 straight minutes, 40 minutes. That's a long time. And that's how long it took the firefighters to get to the 41st floor, took the people down. And this young man, who no one knew who he was, he didn't go down with them. He went back up the stairwell, went back to the 78th floor lobby. And there's a woman named Judy Ween who was at the hospital later that day, and she was telling her husband, she had just come out of surgery. She's like, I've got to tell you what happened. This guy showed up out of nowhere, and he set up a triage, and he was rendering aid to people, and he was helping us down, and he saved my life, and she just wanted to tell him about it. So he found Judy and a few other people, brought them back down this stairway A to the 41st floor, did the same thing again. Firefighters were there. Then he went back up the stairs again. He went back to the 78th floor sky lobby to try and save some more people. And right about that time, about an hour later or so, the South Tower collapsed and everyone who was still in the towers was killed. About a year after that, so around October of 2002, the New York Times did a story with some survivors from the South Tower. And Judy Ween was interviewed, and she was describing this young man who had a red bandana on, who was going around in the lobby and saved her and saved 12 people who would not be here today if it wasn't for this person. Of course, it was Wells Crowther who saved these people, and he was posthumously named a New York City firefighter after his death. And he is a true hero within the Nyack community. They have his picture right next to the door. When the engine leaves, they see his face is the last thing that they see when they leave. So I just wanted to share that story about Wells, as far as thinking about someone who's a true hero. Wasn't even a firefighter, wasn't his job. He had a way out, he could have just left, but he didn't do that. And he's truly amazing. We have to always make sure we remember Wells and everyone else who was working that day to try and save everyone, which, by the way, there were 343 firefighters who were killed. There were 69 police officers who were killed. And since that time, there have been dozens of other first responders who have died from mysterious illnesses and injuries, and they weren't wearing their masks and they didn't know. And, you know, there's a lot of different things going on that day. So we can never, ever forget all of the people who were there that day and did everything they could to save as many people as they could. I was talking to the rabbi before. Rabbi, what was your name again? I'm sorry.
Rabbi Weinstock.
I was talking to Rabbi Weinstock We had two conversations. The second conversation I can't share. He told me that in confidence. But the first conversation I can tell you, he said 9/11 is about resilience. And it was so ubiquitous that he said that because I was going to talk today about the survivor tree, which is the only living organism that survived the collapse of the towers. The only organism in the collapse that survived. So there was a tree after the towers collapsed and the fires were burning for 6 months. By the way, it's the longest structure fire in history. Fires burned for 6 months. There was this tree that was burned to a stump. It was the roots were cut. It just looked like I wish I had a picture of it. I wish I had a picture of it. What it looked like when they found it. But you could not have, it looked like a piece of firewood that had been on the fire for like 2 weeks. They took the tree and brought it to the Parks and Recreation Department of New York City, and they nursed this tree back to life. They nursed it back and they replanted it back where they found it on the grounds of Ground Zero. And it's now called the survivor tree. And it is a tree that truly shows the resilience, not only of America, but of nature and how important it is that we protect our resources. And what's even more extraordinary about this is every year, the New York City Parks and Recreation Department donates 3 saplings from this tree to different communities that have been affected by tragedy. So Rabbi, when you were talking about the resilience, that is so amazing that you brought that up because that is exactly what this tree represents. So last year, the 3 groups that got it was Christchurch community in New Zealand that had that terrible shooting several years ago. The Bahamas was destroyed by hurricanes, and the New York City health workers, all 5 boroughs received a sapling from that tree. They should have sent one to Boca because Boca is the 6th borough of New York, but they didn't send one to Boca. They should have. They missed on that one. But I actually have been to the 9/11 Memorial. I've been there several times, but I took a picture in front of the survivor tree. I wish I had a better picture of me, but it's just a great story. I only have a couple more minutes. I don't want to take too much time, but I did want to talk a little bit about the time that I spent in Israel. The rabbi mentioned, I lost the rabbi. There he is. The rabbi mentioned that in 2017 and 2018, I was deployed to Israel as part of an organization called the Emergency Volunteers Project. Me along with 9 other Americans, including a City of Hollywood firefighter named Darian Munoz. We were the only 2 in Florida who went. There were 2 from Florida, Michigan, Texas, California, and Utah, and 1 person from Virginia who was a doctor. He's a Harvard-trained doctor as well. He's a volunteer firefighter in Virginia. And we went to Israel to respond to the kite and balloon terror attacks that were going on at the time. Hamas was flying in kites and balloons from Gaza into southern Israel. They're basically taking a child's toy and weaponizing it, turning it into a weapon. And they would put sometimes inside of a soccer ball, hoping a child would pick it up and it would explode. If you can think about how insane you have to be to do that. And between May and August of 2018, there were over 1,000 fires started along the Gaza border. Over 1,000 fires. So in the city of Plantation last year, we had 37 fires all year, 37 fires. They had 1,000 between May and August of 2018, which is just absolutely unbelievable. And in the United States, we have 1 million firefighters. In Israel, in the entire state of Israel, there's 2,000 firefighters. So as you can see, why the resources can be overwhelmed. That's why the Emergency Volunteers Project is such an important organization. They come to the United States and recruit American firefighters and train us and send us to Israel. We had to go to this meeting, and some representatives from Israel were there, and they said they were part of the State Department and part of the government. I thought they were Mossad. I don't know. I can't say. But they gave us a political briefing, and they explained the situation. So one story I got to share with you, we were along the Gaza border. There's like a little demilitarized zone between Gaza and Israel. So there are a lot of fires always happening there from the balloons and kites. So we're there fighting the fires. And we're in an armor-plated bulletproof fire engine, by the way. We're in an armor-plated bulletproof fire engine. Who needs this? It's complete insanity. I never knew anything like that existed. So I'm wearing a armor-plated bulletproof vest. I have a Kevlar helmet on. I'm fighting these fires. It's really hot. And all of a sudden, we had to drop what we were doing and take cover behind the fire engine on the Israel side. The IDF was also there. They run cover for us. There are drones overhead. There's planes. There's tanks. It's madness. And all of a sudden we have to take cover behind the fire engine, and we didn't know what was going on. But apparently some of the scouts or spotters spotted some people they thought were Hamas snipers. So we're huddled behind this fire engine, this tank basically. And I look over to my buddy Darren and I said, listen, when I signed up for the EVP, none of this was on the brochure. Like they didn't tell me I was gonna have to huddle behind a tank so I didn't get shot. But it was truly an amazing experience. We also got a chance to take part in the 9/11 memorial that is in Jerusalem, as Zohar likes to talk about, is the only 9/11 memorial outside the United States with the names of all the victims engraved, and it's in Israel. It's the only place that has that, which truly shows the brotherhood and the friendship that Israel has with the United States. I had an opportunity to participate in the ceremony there. The representatives from United Airlines, American Airlines were there. They had a wreath for each of the planes, and it was really a touching ceremony. There's also a piece of steel from the South Tower that is also entombed in the memorial, which is pretty amazing. This is me with David Friedman, the former U.S. ambassador to Israel. There's some places I can't show that picture. And then so I'm not kidding you. I speak sometimes, like, hey, can you leave the David Friedman picture out? Like, no problem. So this picture is interesting because when I was deployed to Israel in 2018, people always ask, well, how does it work? Like, how do you know when you're going to have to go? What's going to happen? Well, actually, we get a phone call. We get a phone call from Jerusalem, the organizer saying, hey, we're going to have a deployment. We need you to get ready to go. This was like on a Wednesday. So I was doing what most people do when they have free time. I was watching Netflix, just relaxing. And I get this call, and 4 days later, I'm standing at the end of a hose line a mile away from Gaza fighting fires. That's how fast things happen. And it just shows you the resilience, Rabbi, the resilience of Israel. People ask me all the time, what's it like fighting in Israel, fighting fires in Israel, fighting fires here? I was like, well, there's a couple differences. Number one, when they're talking, they always seem like they're arguing about something. Always. I remember I was in the Beersheba fire station one night, and two guys were nose to nose, screaming at each other in the kitchen. I thought they were going to fight, so I run in to break it up. And like, no. We're just trying to decide what we're going to have for dinner tonight. I didn't understand the culture. So they are absolutely amazing and resilient, and they constantly live under the threat of terror, and the whole entire country has PTSD, and yet they exist and they continue. Just amazing people. And then we had a terrible tragedy here not too long ago in Surfside. It was a very, very terrible situation. I remember I always have my radio with me. It's with me right now. I'm the public information officer for my fire department. So I always have to have my radio. And I remember hearing the call when it came in. It said a building had collapsed in Surfside. It was a level 5 MCI, which they thought it was more than 1,000 people, which I sat up in my bed. I was at home. I sat up in my bed because I thought it was a mistake. I was dreaming. It's like, there's no way that's possible. But we had a terrible tragedy here. I was deployed to Surfside to work in the Joint Information Center, dealing with the media. And who came to help us? Israel. First people who called to say, we want to come and help. It was Israel. First ones. When there's a tragedy anywhere in the world, we're always there. Our tragedy, our phone wasn't ringing, but Israel called and they came. It was amazing. This is me with the Commander Golan Bach from the IDF search and rescue team. He was amazing, very, very nice. And really, I just want to say that I think it's important that we never forget those that we lost on 9/11. We remember our friends in Israel. I'm proud to be a member of the Emergency Volunteers Project, and since I've been there twice and I've completed the training, I'm actually an Israeli firefighter as well. I need to learn some Hebrew possibly one of these days. I'll probably have to do that. I only know a few bad words, but that's about it. That's all they talk. And one final story, then I'm going to go because my time is up. But in the United States, when we go on a fire call, we have what are called a PAR tag system. It's a passport system. We have a little name tag under our helmet. We take off and put it on the board. And so that's how they know who's on the call. They take the boards, they bring it to command so they know, okay, these are the people here. In Israel, it's a little different. They check in over the radio on the way out of the station. So when you're leaving the station, they go on the radio. Who's on the truck? It's Moshe, and it's whoever's on the truck. So for some reason, Israelis cannot say my name. I don't know what it is. I've been in the north, I've been in the south, I've been in Jerusalem. It doesn't matter. My name is Aston, like the Aston Martin, like the car, but they cannot pronounce it. So they called me all kinds of different names. So it was always a running joke when we were leaving the station. The person on the radio couldn't say my name, so they're like, Austin, and the dispatcher's like, who? And they're trying to say my name. Then they just finally say, the American, and they're, oh, okay. So that was like a running joke. But listen, I want to thank you all for having me here. My time is up. Thank you again for the invitation, Miraz and the doctor there. And did I say her name right? Oh, see, I can't say her name. See, it works. It goes around. It goes around. I can't even say her name. But thank you all for the invitation. Thank you for having me.
Aston, thank you so much for sharing your story. We thank you for your service. We thank you for your service here in Florida. We thank you for your service in Israel. I know I will never forget your words. And as a small memento, on behalf of JNF, wanted to present you something so you'll remember your time here as well. And it's JNF is known, of course, for bringing water to the land of Israel. Water is helpful in your line of work, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Very helpful.
Very helpful. So as on behalf of JNF and the Young Israel of Hollywood, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I would just like to say one more thing. The very first speech I ever did when I came back from Israel, I did a live interview on Israeli TV, and it went like viral all over the world after a big fire in Israel. And the very first event I ever did was for the JNF. It was in Aventura. And after the speech, people were coming up and talking, hey, have you ever heard of the JNF? I said, yes, actually, I do know the JNF. Your names are on every fire engine I was on in Israel. So thank you to the JNF for everything.
Again, thank you so much to Aston for everything you do and for sharing your time with us this evening. It's my distinct pleasure now to call up our member, Shaya Gutleizer. Many of you know Shaya from the community, from being a member of our synagogue, for his help on the safety and security team here. But many don't know that before Shaya retired, he was a FDNY firefighter, a member of Hatzalah, and was there on ground zero on 9/11. So we look forward to him sharing a few words from that day.
Somebody asked me what I was going to say when I got up here, and I honestly said I don't prepare my speeches. And I'm very grateful because my standard one was half stolen already. I don't have to repeat all that.
Sorry.
It's all good. And we also asked to get a survivor tree here as a personal favor, and we might actually have it. Anyway, I'm going to start with just the simple statistics of September 11th. And I'm going to look down because I do have to read these off. I'm horrible with numbers. 2,977 people were murdered in the attacks on September 11th. 2,606 of those were at the World Trade Center. Of those, approximately 200 of them jumped to their own death to get away from the heat, the flames, and knowing what was coming. 412 first responders went running into the building. There were others that were already in. We got 412 that responded there and went running in, understanding what was coming. And you pointed out the story, as they call it, the man with the red bandana, and countless others. It wasn't just volunteer firefighters. There are countless stories of people that worked in the towers, no training whatsoever, who helped people out and then went running back in to go help others. And even more so, some that went up there and stayed with coworkers that couldn't make it out, knowing what was coming. And they made sure that these people wouldn't be alone in their final moments. 90 countries lost citizens on September 11th in that attack. Now, 3,311 9/11 first responders, according to the CDC, have died of a 9/11 related illness in the last 20 years. I would have wrote down all the numbers. They send us every year a whole list of how many people signed up. I was looking at it on Friday with a reporter from CBS, and she said she didn't know that there were that many people in New York City. You mentioned the volunteer firefighter. So another one that was in there was Glenn Winnock of Holland and Knight. He was a volunteer firefighter in Long Island. And he grabbed his gear. He actually drove into work. I still don't understand why anybody drives to New York City. But he grabbed his gear and he got to work, and he also didn't make it out. His firm donated the fire department memorial that is right outside Ground Zero by the 10 House, which is one of only 2 FDNY stations that the engine and the ladder have the same number. Normally it's all mixed up, so we call a house by a different name. This one is the 10 House because it's engine 10 and ladder 10. And on the side of it is a memorial made of copper. And it shows scenes that was taken off pictures of that day of the firefighters, EMTs, and paramedics and police officers working. When they decided to build that, they were contemplating adding some color to it, making it a little flashier, a little nicer, and the decision was made one color. They did it with helmets. You can tell the difference between a police officer's hat and a firefighter's helmet. But the idea being that there was no color to it, nothing more. They didn't show where they came from, a race. They did show gender just to show that there were women working there that day. There was a common misconception that 20 years ago in FDNY, they were mostly white men and no women. But the idea was to show that there was nothing, that there was everybody there. It didn't matter who you were. The responders that went running in were of every nationality, every race, religion, gender. And I promise you, nobody in there cared who was helping them out. That morning, and I'm sorry, Reverend Farberg, to correct you, but I was no longer a member of Hatzalah at that point. I joined Hatzalah at 18. My father was a Hatzalah coordinator in New York, and I did my EMT course, and that was my decision. I was going to go join Hatzalah. And then I decided that it was a little smarter to wait till I was married because it was way too complicated. I'm only allowed to go certain calls, certain times with certain people, too much. But I decided to get a little bit of experience. So I went to work in EMS in New York City. It was supposed to be a summer job, and I never looked back. I loved it. It was the most amazing job I've ever had. Okay, let's be fair. The only job I've ever had across the spectrum. I've been a first responder since 18. But the idea of doing that just took me over, and I stuck around. I made a mistake of thinking politics was a great idea. And I took some time off in 2001 to help a friend of a friend get elected to the New York City Council. And September 11th was primary election day. And I was sitting with a couple of the other campaign leaders in Borough Park having breakfast, because one of them wanted a good old fashioned Israeli breakfast. You got to go to a Jewish bagel store for that, at least in New York. And we were sitting there when the page came over. We used to carry those little pagers. I think a few of you might have remembered those tiny little things, really annoying. We couldn't talk back. We had to go find the phone and call back. And we've got those. That's how they would give us our jobs while we were working, call us on the radio, but they didn't want to give over personal information. So it would pop up on the pager, and everyone took their pager home. We didn't realize it then. That was just a way that they can find us anytime they wanted us. And the page went off and said that a plane hit the Twin Towers. And in my mind, I'm thinking tiny little plane, little thing, some guy that just didn't know what he was doing. But then they said they're evacuating the towers. Now, I'm sure you can confirm what an evacuation of that size is going to look like. That's a disaster within itself. And I figured, why not? Let's get to work. I'm going to go put on my uniform and I'm going to go down there and help. It's going to be an experience. Learning to work a disaster of that size is going to be something I'm never going to see again. I had no idea what I was getting into. Again, I'm 20 years old. And by the time I grabbed my gear, I went running home, grabbed my gear. And by the time I did, another plane had hit. We've heard rumors of more. And also the night before, I mean, election day, no one in politics sleeps the night before. We got bored and we were watching a movie. Somebody had just bought Pearl Harbor. So you know where my head went. And I remember seeing some buddies from Hatzalah running. They were all meeting up with the ambulance. And I was like, we'll see you down there. Like, big joke. We're all going to get to work. We're going to do this. No idea what was coming. And I jumped into one of the cars with a bunch of friends and we headed out there, all of us in our uniforms with our gear. And as we went over the Manhattan Bridge, we found out what we were getting into. When Tower 2, the first tower that went down, collapsed. And we all looked at each other for that brief second, not a word, and continued driving. It wasn't a doubt in our mind what was going to happen next, and we were going in anyway. Cop made us pull our car over at some point. There was just no more vehicles getting in. We grabbed our gear, we ran in. I stopped an ambulance that was driving and I grabbed a bunch of N95 masks. We used to call them dust masks because they look just like those. We were taught then that those have a 15-minute lifespan in bad conditions, hour max, which is why he made the joke about me not wearing the mask. Out of all my crew, I was the one who knew that it was worthless 2 hours later. So there was a picture of me at ground zero and I'm standing with a bunch and I'm always like, I'm the one without the mask. It just translates a little differently the last 2 years, especially in Florida. And we got cracking. We went to work. We got people out. As I got up there, I saw a partner, a girl I used to work with, a few years older than me, sweetheart. She had a little son at home. And we were running up the stairs together. Her female partner that was covering that day, myself, and a Hatzalah member from Crown Heights. And a couple of firefighters came out carrying a firefighter. He had gotten hit in the head with something. And he was bleeding. He just couldn't see for lack of, just too much blood coming down. And he pushed him right on me and goes, get him help. And I looked over at the girls and I said, all right, we'll see you inside. And we got this guy out. One of those girls made it out. The other one was buried 3 days later. I didn't find that out until about 2 weeks after 9/11, when I went back to work for the first time. Because we stuck around, we stayed at ground zero until they started getting us into shifts. I can tell you 20 years later, the most haunting thing, I still volunteer with the fire services out here. Not an engine, I do the canteen. Still get to help out in other ways, but my days running around like that are done. And every time I hear that pass alarm, that's the alarm that firefighters wear, so when they stop moving, we know where to find them. To this day, every time I hear it, I shiver, because that's all you heard in downtown Manhattan. Hundreds of those going off at the same time. Now, I'm going to skip forward a little bit to September 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th. I can tell you how many people came down to volunteer to help. I can't tell you where they came from because they were from all over the place. I can't tell you what religion they belonged to. Chapels were set up for they say there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. That was a foxhole. And there was chapels set up for religions I've never even heard of. There were that many. And everyone working side by side. The Hasidim that were taking care of the Jewish bodies working side by side with the priests giving last rites to whoever they pulled out when we didn't know who it was. And that's something else to point out. A few days ago, they identified 2 more bodies from that day. It is 20 years later and there are still families that have nothing to bury. For those who don't know, I recommended visiting the 9/11 museum. There is a memorial wall there, and it has looks like a bunch of blue papers. It's supposed to show the skyline of September 11th morning. Behind that wall is a room where all the remains that have not been identified are stored. And families can go in there and pay their respects to their loved ones, because that's the only spot they have. From a religious perspective, I know a lot of Kohanim that will not go to the museum. They don't go to ground zero because of that. It's a cemetery. On September 12th, America came together. The world came together. The donations that poured in, the people that were there, the people comforting each other in the street. It was the most amazing thing. Terrorists came to destroy our way of life, and the only thing that they did was kill a bunch of people and bring us together. They did what no one's been able to do since. Nobody cared who you were, where you came from, what you did, what you believed in. Everybody was out there helping each other. You know, I still think the irony of it, drug dealers were donating their product at Ground Zero. There was readily drugs available for first responders. I know that the newspapers did the articles later about all the other things that were available, but the fact remains that everybody was donating everything and anything that they could. People were out there helping. When I finally left Ground Zero, they told me to go up the West Side Highway. There was a staging area where we're going to get a ride back to where either our firehouse or wherever we left our vehicles. There were volunteers waiting with their cars to drive us. And it was about Clarkson Street. And I had to walk, I think it's a good mile. That was a mile of people on both sides of the street, screaming, clapping, cheering, trying to shake a hand, offering water. That's all they did, was stay there just to go cheer on the responders. I don't think any of us do it for that, but it's kind of nice. And people were there, they just camped out, and that's where they lived for months. When we went back to do the final ceremony, when they made it a recovery, no longer rescue, and we started taking out the ambulances and the apparatus and all those people, and then some were still there. And yes, it still does not compare to a firefighter funeral. You can take miles of that. But the point I'm trying to bring out is the way everybody came together and everybody did what needed to be done. And if we can do that after such a tragedy, there's no reason that we can't do that on any other day of the week, any other day of the month, and any other day of the year. To be there. I mean, maybe I'm a little spoiled. I became an adult in the fire services, so we don't know anything else. It doesn't matter where you come from, what religion. It doesn't matter that I'm Jewish and the guy next to me is Muslim, that I'm going to Israel and he's going to visit Palestine. It's irrelevant to us. We do our job, we do it well, and we're a family. I know the wives, the kids of everyone I've ever worked with. The ones that moved out here, we still see each other all the time. We get together, and some of us live across the state, and we make sure once a year we're all together, because that's just the way it is. It's a family. And that's the way it should be everywhere. And to me, that is the most important thing. The only other thing I'm going to talk about is, I found out last week that I'm going to get to visit Washington, D.C. again. This will be the 6th time going down there to fight for 9/11 responders' health benefits. 6 times in 20 years, we had to go down and take on Congress to get what is ours. And I say what is ours because they are the ones who told us that the air is safe to breathe so that they can reopen. The last time we were down there, I got a very interesting surprise. Before that, I was the baby of the bunch. I was 20 years old when it happened. Most responders are 21 and up. And when we looked at formulas for anything, looking at how long life expectancy, whatever it was, we always looked at me. I should be the last one if it actually would go in age order. And last time we went, I wasn't the formula anymore. There were a bunch of younger people there, 20s. They opened this, something that never even occurred to us. We were there for how long? They opened the schools and sent the kids back to school. These children got on a school bus every morning, went into a militarized zone with big gates around it, tanks, big Jeeps, big scary guys with M16s. And they came in and they saw what we were doing all day from the windows of their classroom. And it took a girl to realize that at the age of 20, when they had their first high school reunion, that many of her classmates should not have died of cancer. It made no sense. So she did a little bit of research and figured it all out. And she reached out to the right people and she came to kick doors in DC with us. And I bring that up as a way of, and I said this to all the kids that came by and visited the memorial yesterday that we set up here. This country was built on a way that we can affect change. We can change anything and everything we want. It takes persistence. And 6 times in DC, and every single time we walked out getting exactly what we want. Unfortunately for us, we didn't realize what we needed. And every single time we got there, we were told it is not going to happen. There is no way. And each time we did it. And it's not a bragging thing, but that's the way America is. We were built as a country that anybody can do it. Anybody can. For all I know, maybe one day my kid's going to be kicking in doors in Congress. I don't know. Maybe they'll get a law passed that I shouldn't be driving past 60 so I can get my car. But whatever it might be, the lessons that I learned from that day, from the aftermath in the last 20 years of being a part of the 9/11 community, are things that serve me well across the board. And I'm grateful to be here to help keep the memory alive of all of those who gave their life that day, of all of those who gave their life since, and unfortunately, for those who continue to give their lives for what they did then and what they continue to do. And a pathetic thought, we were sitting after a tough, it was Shabbos table in my father's house, after a brutal week in DC. We had just gotten destroyed. We were being refused meetings and I was beat. And I said, I really wonder what's going to happen the next time we get hit. And my father looked at me and he said, all you guys are going to put on your gear and go running right back in. And I wanted to curse him out for it, but he's right. I'd love to be able to go look at Congress and threaten them with that, but even they know it. First responders do it because they love the job. Volunteers, paid, it doesn't matter. I promise you, we don't get paid enough to do it. But at the end of the day, it's about what we do, saving lives, and any one of us would do it again in a heartbeat. I will. And I know everyone that I know that wears the badge will too. So just know that no matter what's going on, there's always going to be a first responder there to back you up. Thanks.
All the Deputy Council of Israel, they want to present a flag.
This is an opportunity. This is the memorial monument in Israel that Camp Emet Israel Jewish National Fund built 2009. A few hours ago, Israel made a formal ceremony in Israel there. And it's written there, the JNF KTL September 11 Memorial in the foothills of Jerusalem express the deep connection and the shared value between the people of Israel and the United States. It is the only memorial outside of the United States that honors each victim. The memorial is an American flag waving and transforming into a flame. A piece of melted metal from the ruins of the Twin Towers from the base of the monument. This memorial served as the site of an official ceremony held with the United States every year as Israel honors the memory of the heroes who fell and recognize the heroes who walk among us. Thank you for your commitment and sacrifice. Thank you so much. It's an opportunity to say that Aston received it on Friday because he continued to volunteer and continue to meet our next generation during the schools. So thank you again, Aston, for your service.
Mayor, rabbis, dear friends, good evening all. My name is Mike Drakes and I'm the new Deputy Consul General at the Israeli Consulate in Miami. I'm proud to stand here tonight and to say that my first event in my new role will be to honor the brave first responders in our community. On behalf of the State of Israel, I'm here to salute all the courageous men and women whose duty is to protect, serve, and particularly to save others. But especially, I want to salute you, Shaya, for being one of the first responders in the worst terrorist attack the world has ever known. And to you, Aston, it's okay? Who fought as a volunteer the same kind of terrorism at the Gaza border. Actually, I have a secret to tell you. We are all Israeli former Mossad agents. And in Beersheba, where I live, we argue all the time. As we just saw, I want to take this opportunity to thank Young Israel of Hollywood, Jewish National Fund, Mayor Josh Levy with the City of Hollywood for their initiative and collaboration on this important event. As we just saw, Israel is the only country in the world that has a monument for September 11th, recognizing each life lost on that tragic day. Each life who is and was, who was and still is an entire world for the remaining and mourning families. Each year on September 11th, just like today, thousands of Israelis visit the memorial in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel, and to pay the respect and honor the brave first responders who work tirelessly to save lives. This memorial is an example of the shared values between the US and Israel. Both countries honor and cherish life, freedom, equality, and democracy, thus symbolizing an unbreakable friendship between Israel and the United States, just as I mentioned. Israel also sent an official search and rescue delegation to help in the catastrophic Surfside building collapse, where once again, the heroism of the first responders was demonstrated. I have something that I want to share with you tonight. I am a first responder too. The unit that was sent here from the IDF, from Pikud HaOref, the Home Front Command, Chilutz V'Atzala, Save and Rescue, is my reserve unit that I serve until this day. At the age of 42, I am a volunteer also. So thus, I know exactly what those brave men and women endure in their work, although I never dealt with such a disaster. I know the chaos, the loss of life, the smell, the noise, or even worse, the lack of noise. And as one of you, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for heroism and thank you for your service. Thank you for everything. May we never forget the legacy of those 343 firefighters and paramedics, 23 New York City police officers, and 37 Port Authority police officers who were killed, who perished when saving the lives of others on September 11th. Their memory and spirit live on and will never be forgotten. In Psalm 29:11, not 9:11, but 29:11, King David wrote, Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai yevarech et amo b'shalom. May the Almighty God give strength to his people, and then they will be blessed with peace. As we mark the Jewish New Year this week, I want to wish everyone a sweet and healthy New Year. Shana tova u'metuka, gmar chatima tova. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
And we're so honored to have so many first responders. We also just like to call out Marc Eisenmann to share a few words with us, his experience the day of 9/11 being at Ground Zero as well.
It's 20 years later, and my wife, who's the best thing that ever happened to me, has to sleep next to a man that can't breathe. I have sleep apnea caused by the effects of Ground Zero, as well as breathing and wheezing problems. 20 years ago yesterday, I came into work. I got there early, as I always did, and I had 15 people that were all trading my money. We were affectionately known as the Jew crew and the God Squad. I didn't tolerate anyone coming late except for my cousin, who would come in every morning from Lakewood for 2 hours. Well, that morning, he ran in horror across the bridge as he had to dodge falling bodies. I haven't fully discussed what I'm about to say in 20 years. and felt it would be cathartic for me to do so. The first plane hit the building, and I said, guys, sit down and let's make a bunch of money, because we thought some idiot teenager had flown his Cessna into the building. When the second building hit, money stopped mattering. I said, everybody put away your stuff. We're now under attack. I went in with my associate consigliere into the other room. I had the whole floor to myself. It was under construction. They gave us our own place. And I said, how are we going to now handle these 15 people whose lives were under my care at the time? I sent 2 of my guys into my office and said, please say Tehillim. I sent another 2 guys to start ripping up our undershirts to prepare torches in case the power would go out. I sent other guys to start dealing with what was about to happen. We went to the room outside, decided on what we were going to do, and as we walked out, we started shaking. We used some expletives not appropriate for a shul in unison, turned to our left in what had been one of the most gorgeous days of my life, 70 degrees and perfect. It was makas choshech, it was pure black. The floor had shaken. We ran outside and I told my people, get in the hallways and start getting people out. And we started calling people. We were about a quarter of a mile from ground zero. We started calling people who were choking at the exchange and bringing them up to my floor where I had plenty of space. I had a woman who was terrified from the islands. She was scurried under a desk. We used calling cards to give her the ability to call her family. Another person said, smash the soda machine. I said, we don't need to do that just yet, relax. I said, who has $1? And it was something out of a movie. There was a pile of dollars in front of me. And I sent one of my guys, I said, empty the soda machine. Because we were with a certain ethical and moral compass, the vending guy kept his product next to the machines, never needing to bring it in because he knew we would never take something out of the box and we would put our money into the machine. Well, that day we stole all of that product, everything. We also went to the guys who were under construction. We stole all the masks. And then I had a guy going and we were folding up papers, putting hot water on them and putting them in our face so that we'd be able to breathe because we didn't know what would happen next. And we had to go in and out. At that point, everyone started screaming because we had about 80 people, let's get out of here. At which point I did my math and said the safest place we're going to be is in this beat up old building next to the exchange, where the only way we're getting hit is if they screw up and miss the exchange. But we don't want to be a target with 500,000 people trying to leave lower Manhattan in a sea of heads. We stayed there as I slowly allowed people to disperse. I had one woman who had emphysema. I finally went outside to a fire engine that no longer looked like, a fire ambulance. It didn't look like an ambulance. It looked like something out of a Blues Brothers movie. And I got them to take her, she had emphysema, to NYU hospital. They were headed out. And by 3 o'clock, I dispersed the rest of my guys, with the exception of the 4 guys who said they wanted to come with me, at which point risk reward changed because I said, now we go to the pile and save some lives. We sent the one Kohen laden with all of our books that couldn't wait till the next day and sent him on a 11-mile hike up the Hudson to get out of there. And we then went towards ground zero. We jumped on a bus of volunteers. There were 29 others. And the bus started to make a turn across the Brooklyn Bridge, at which point I, standing there as quiet as you all know I am, and said, dude, you're going the wrong way, or we wouldn't have seen our loved ones for another week. We stopped him and we turned, and he dropped us right a block and a half away from ground zero, where we sat in front of a church waiting for orders. I was then elected in charge of the volunteer squad, and I answered to the sheriff. I was 33 years old, living in New York my whole life. It was the first time that I knew we had something called a sheriff in New York City. But at this point, I had still been living a movie. At some point, I got a very angry wife because in the tumult of trying to take care of all these people that were suddenly under my charge, I'd forgotten to tell her I wasn't dead, which has happened a couple of times since then, by the way. That's when the day got real. The day got real when one of my charges, I was elected in charge of these 34 volunteers who I had sitting on the railing of the church, said we should write a next of kin because we'd been told that the pile had 30 and 40-foot voids with fires burning. And that if something were to happen, that we should know who to call. I said, that sounds right. Scene 2, Act 3, let's do that. And I prepared, and 34 of us wrote our next of kin with a phone number down. And I proudly, after handing out masks and gloves to those that hadn't had the ability to steal all the gloves and masks from my floor under construction, I brought it up to the sheriff. We had started to get acquainted. It was at that moment this day became real and not a movie to me. As he wrote his name of a girl, he says, we're not married. We've been together 17 years. I don't tell her enough how much I love her. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And he ripped off this space at the bottom of the page. He handed it to me as I handed him the list of 34 names of next of kin. At that point, I got shivers down my spine, which I have now. And all of a sudden, I had one of those, what the hell are you doing here moments. We then sat there for an hour and a half, at which point a fire chief, obviously retired in his 70s in full regalia, running faster than most 22-year-olds in the Olympics, came flying by, screaming an expletive, run, run, fill in the blank. We didn't need to think twice. When there's a 70-plus-year-old man running like that, we ran. And we ran faster than I ever thought I could carry my belly. And we hid behind a fashion institute that was a block away. At which point I closed my eyes, talked to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because I didn't know if I'd be alive a minute from then, said Tehillim and waited. And that's when Building 7 had fallen, a 49-floor tower that had been burning all day. We then waited another 2 hours. 15 or 20 burly guys with anchors and women on their tattooed arms came by, all frustrated. And I said, what's going on? We're waiting to be sent on the pile. And at which point they said, too many people have been there. They turned us away. I looked to the left and saw us, a bunch of Poindexter traders, and said, if they're not letting them on, they're not letting us on. It was 7:30 at night. I turned to the sheriff. I said, here's my number. You call me in within an hour and a half. I'll have 200 people here to volunteer in the next 4 days. And I told everybody time to go home. We then walked up to Canal Street where the subway was free that day. We saved each $1.50. At which point at 9:30 at night, I came home. My mother-in-law had been there to surprise my wife for her birthday. We brought her in for the Michael Jackson concert. I passed my wife, my parents, and hugged my children like I have never hugged a child before. My best friend and roommate for 4 years was laid off on September 10th, Monday morning, because of the internet bubble burst. At which point, with tears in his eyes and a new bride and 2 kids in Teaneck, David Fisher looked up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and said, how could you do this to me? My friend Avi Piotnica, who was riding the on the Hatzalah guys, that was the emergency response vehicle. It was the mini ambulance. He left his jacket, went into the tower, was told by an aide firefighter, take care of her over there, went across the pavilion. The firefighter ran back up and was never heard from again. When Avi Piotnica went back to the it was crushed into a mangled piece of metal, and he put in a claim for his jacket. I can tell you that money meant nothing that day. Everybody's arms were open, and I thought it appropriate to cathartically release myself of these stories because Yom Kippur is Thursday. And I have never, before that day, realized how much we are simply sheep in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's arms, and it's for him to decide if we live another day. And the only thing that we leave each other are legacy and kindness. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Mark. And just to wrap up the event, again, we're honored to have all these first responders and members of the Israeli consulate and JNF here. I'd like to call up the mayor, Mayor Josh Levy, and to just share some final words with us.
Wow. So I think all of you, like myself, are pretty awestruck with the words that we heard today, both from Shaya and from Aston, and from the gentleman who was there in New York. I think none of us who weren't there, could relate to this, but we're struck by it, and certainly I think emboldens us to be ever stronger as people for the ideals that they showed on that day and show thereafter, leaving us with the word kindness before and resilience, especially in these trying times with what we're facing with this coronavirus, and just as a people who are under attack by this time a virus. Certainly all those attributes that were called on that day, September 11th, are called on us now. And I'm just honored to be in the company of these gentlemen, to hear these stories. It empowers me to be a better person, especially during this time of the year for us as Jewish people. And so I just thank you for inviting me, Rabbi, and the organizers, and look forward to seeing you all again in better times. Thank you.
Just 1 minute, I would like to Rabbi Weinstock and Rabbi Freiberg to stop by, and we're going to Rabbi Freiberg, Rabbi Weinstock, please may you want to receive a plaque from both of you, please.
They said I'd be an honored guest.
I just want to take the opportunity to thank Mayor Levy for all he does for the citizens of Hollywood, and especially the Jewish community and the young Israel Hollywood community. It's really wonderful to know that you're there and responsive, working for the people of Hollywood, working for us every day. Thank you very much. Wishing you strength in the future in this new Jewish year.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to everyone here for coming out, and for those who are on Zoom, thank you for joining us. And a big yasher koach to Yitzchak. It wouldn't have happened without him. So thank you, Yitzchak, for making this happen.